the global consortium uniting the world through education. Good afternoon, everybody. All right, how's everybody doing today? All right, I wanted to just talk briefly to people here at History 275, that there's a little handout that I gave. I have 3 possible essay questions, and I'm going to choose 2 out of the 3, so please just make sure that you look over them. And I gave another little PowerPoint presentation so that people can go through World War II PowerPoint and presentation and make sure that you understand everything. Next week, because I have to cover the History 275 class, that we will cover the Cold War, and we will do the Cold War on Monday and Wednesday, so no exam next week, and then the following week we will have our examination because we are doing a little bit of this here today. Now, I'm improvising a little bit. We want to talk a little bit about what happened in Guam and the Chamuro Indians and some of the conflict that took place. And I just read an article before I came today focusing on the emphasis, I guess you will, of talking about Pearl Harbor or the rape of Nanking, and all of those things that the author said are very worthwhile subjects that we should be looking at. And we covered this here, throwing babies up and catching them with bayonets and talking about some of those other issues. But somewhere along the line that we forgot about Guam, and that Guam does not get the attention. And you may remember all the way back to William McKinley in 1898 that we picked up Guam, and it was this process of Americanization that was taking place for a long period of time before the Japanese hit Guam on December 8th, 1941, and then they took over Guam, estimates anywhere between 30 months and 36 months, and obviously a lot of the changes that took place there. And what I would like to do at some point here today is give you 2 YouTube clips so that we can see the clips and kind of talk about the clips and see how horrific the warfare is when we finally get to Guam. They give some cameo appearances to the people on Guam, which is normal. This is kind of about the United States coming in and winning. We have a lot of videos like that, but I like to kind of open the discussion. And I think for the benefit of our guest here today, I mean people that are in other classes that are joining us. I had one student that the other day did not speak in class, but he spoke to me after class, and we had a very, very nice discussion. And I never coerce anybody to speak, you know, right? You don't have to speak, only if you want to pass the class. But anyway, the student talked to me and said, let's talk about some alternatives. That is to say, we often critique whether we should drop the atomic bomb on Hiroshima or Nagasaki. What about Pearl Harbor? What about this? And I think if that's not the answer, then we may want to kick it back and say, what is the answer? We end up having that kind of dialogue. And I think I put this in one of the essay questions. Can anybody here in my 275 class kick it off a little bit today and tell me, what is the American rationale for dropping the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki? That is to say, if I went through the textbook and it shows up on your essay, salute, and we get to that, that's because I'm bilingual, and we come back and say, you know, what's the rationale for that? What is the American rationale for dropping the atomic bomb? For the people that want to pass the class. Yes, anybody? Anybody? You. Okay, and why did we have to do it? Okay, it was either them or, you know, us kind of mentality. Yeah, please.
It would have ended the war quicker and less American casualties.
Okay, I'm repeating that because we don't have the microphones. It would end the war quicker, all right, with a lot less American casualties taking place, so that's something. Now, if I get you guys talking briefly about that, I know that you give me kind of the conventional answer. What do you guys think about that? I mean, 1 million, maybe more casualties by going in there and fighting the Japanese. What do we learn about the Japanese in the classes, in the video that we've seen, and some of the video that we'll see with respect to Guam? What are we going to find out here? What part of that rationale too? Yes?
That they were like fighting from the sky.
Okay. All right, so the Japanese are not going to surrender. All right, we had picked up on that. We talked about kamikazes that are coming in, and with the kamikazes, just enough gasoline to take out. And I just want to draw this little, and I see a hand up, which I think is a good thing. Isn't it very difficult to defeat people who are willing to give their lives? And just one of those topics to think about here, we kind of get to this point that the United States needs to be safe, secure. I don't know if you guys remember right after 9/11 when George W. Bush was president, we had a helicopter going, 24/7 right over the White House to give us that security, which we needed some security. How expensive is it to have a helicopter 24/7? And the places that you work, if somebody wants to walk into a supermarket as a suicide bomber, are you going to be able to stop all of those people? Right? It's very difficult to defeat an enemy that's willing to give up their lives for whatever cause they have, and especially if they see it as a noble cause. And so I think that we want to draw some of those parallels out. I saw a couple other hands out there. I don't want to take people out here, but just to focus again on dropping the bomb, what is the rationale for that? And maybe one of the other things that we saw when I scrolled down on YouTube, when we saw all the reasons like, don't forget what the Japanese did to the Chinese, don't forget about Bataan, don't forget about the Philippines, all kinds of other justifications. And I remember saying in class, that's largely up to you guys to figure that out for yourself. Is that a good rationale to think of what the Japanese did? What other things do we have? I saw a couple hands up there. Anybody like to? Yeah, please.
Show the rest of the world any kind of power we had, what kind of ammunition we had.
Mm-hmm.
Basically saying, this is what happens when you kind of process.
Okay. I think that there's, so it's kind of, yeah, please.
But wouldn't the Japanese have eventually given up anyways, since they were basically lost their Air Force, their Navy?
Okay.
They were pretty much surrounded.
Okay.
And we were a country that was already an industrial country, which was driven on oil and stuff like that, and all the resources were already gone.
Okay. Is it a punitive thing that's taken place, then they're going to disintegrate, but we're going to give it to them anyway? Because of other issues that are taking place, Pearl Harbor, or saturation bombing, or, we talked about this before, these things don't have to be mutually exclusive. You can bring Russia into the war, right? Russia declare war against the Japanese by dropping it, and at the same time show Russia what you have. All right, it's kind of like the beginning here. You had your hand up, I think. Do you have something? Anybody else have anything to say here? Yeah.
So would it be okay to say then that the reason why the bomb was dropped was mostly to end the war as soon as possible before Russia could get involved in Japan?
Well, we wanted to get Russia in. All right, that was one of the things. How are we going to bring Russia in? Well, you've got this thing. This is a good time for the Russians to declare war. It's at the beginning of the end for the Japanese, right? So that's a major factor, so that you can bring that, all about. And the other point that I was saying, that things don't have to be mutually exclusive. I mean, the reason for asking is there's all kinds of debate. People get hostile, and I mentioned this once before watching C-SPAN. It was very interesting how the conversation went when you had these British historians arguing that there was no reason to drop any of the atomic bombs, let alone, as I think you're hinting at, the second atomic bomb, right? Even if you might justify the first, no way the second. And it was funny that there was no dissent on C-SPAN, nobody disagreeing with the British authors until the very end. And again, for the benefit of my guests here who are not in the 275 class, the benefits where somebody comes in and says, at this time, you're not investigating the soldiers. Why are the soldiers interested then in dropping the atomic bombs? And you see so many outspoken 80-year-olds, right? They're talking about the fact, what would you do in that situation? I mean, what do you think would happen if you said, I think that Japan's going to fall apart anyway. I don't think we need to drop the atomic bombs. Why are so many of the veterans in the United States so adamant about dropping the atomic bomb? Do you think? Okay. Okay, yeah.
Well, they saw the war firsthand, so they have the psychological background and the actual emotions, feelings, and everything like that. What happened. And as soon as possible.
Okay. All right. I think that's a good point. Any other points here that people want to put in here? Yeah.
I think another big reason why veterans supported dropping the bomb was because out of all the technology America had, they were still drawn to hand-to-hand combat with the Japanese. And no matter what they would have done, as soldier-wise, military-wise, they were still having to sacrifice lives. So dropping the bomb meant saving lives and less hand-to-hand combat up close. And I mean, whether or not it was just taxing physically fighting them, afterwards they couldn't sleep because they didn't know when they were coming.
Okay.
And mentally and physically, they were ready to end it as soon as they could.
I think that's I think there's a little clip here on the YouTube where someone says the waiting was worse than the actual fighting. As you were just hinting, you don't want to go to sleep, and what people would do is you'd be with two people, like you sleep and I'll stay awake, but you can't even go to sleep because you're just so pensive worrying about doing this fighting that many people didn't get any sleep at all. All right, so yes, somebody else had a hand I just saw here very quick. Yeah?
Wasn't there a case where the Japanese were drinking sake, so
Yes?
we can...
Sure. They were drinking sake. They were just getting boozed up like that. They were coming at you like wild boars, you know, with all the alcohol. I tell people this. I don't make any bones about this, but I drank 2 pints of Harp Lager right before I got married, and I think they call that Dutch courage. I told people that I have beautiful handwriting. I went to a good Catholic school. My handwriting is really good. But the minute I got married, I scrawled out there because my hand started to palsy. I couldn't believe that I had just done it. You know what I mean? So I kind of signed this little thing. But I think I took that Dutch courage and said, yes, I'm going to go on and get married. Yeah?
You said the British said that we didn't have to drop an atomic bomb, but do they have any information that we know about?
No. These were British historians, not, you know, Great Britain making that argument, but looking at kind of the same arguments we heard before, that Japan was collapsing. There really wasn't any reason to drop the atomic bomb, right? At least specifically they were talking about the second one, but maybe even arguing for the first one. But, you know, that's a big part of the historical question when you say, where does your evidence come from? Well, you get evidence that you could look at Japan disintegrating, falling apart. It doesn't look like you need to do that. And then somebody changing that perspective and say, let's talk to the people that actually did the fighting in the United States of America. Why are they so strongly, and the people that were interviewed, in favor? And I think what they were doing was pointing out a weakness of the book in the evidence that you were constructing, the evidence you were putting together. You did a very good job here to make your point, which often people do, right? You always marshal evidence to make your point, but you neglect somebody else. And you say, wait, let's go to these people. Would that change your opinion about all of these things, okay? And I think that's the implications when we look at Pearl Harbor and we look at some of the other acts that happened, the rape of Nanking, we look at dropping the atomic bombs and those kinds of elements. Now, one of the other things I want to do here, just to buy it a little time, and I'll shift gears here. There's a tendency, I think, when you're taking a history class to go from chapter to chapter. You know, student, what chapter are we on, Mr. Haas? What are we doing next? And it's like you start from scratch. You leave one and you start another. And I don't think that's the way that this class goes. The United States dropped 2 atomic bombs. All right, we dropped 2 atomic bombs, and as I said in the last class, it's like we have the monopoly here. We are in charge. We have the secret weapon. Nobody else has it. And it's a very paradoxical time at the end of World War II, very much like the 1920s. Some of you people remember about the 1920s. It's a period of liberation, people doing all kinds of crazy things in the 1920s, you know, the dances, the jazz music, listening to the radio, bathtub gin. And at the other hand, it's a period of rigidity and narrowness. When I mean rigidity and narrowness, immigration quotas, we don't want immigrants coming in, Sacco and Vanzetti, the Scopes trial. You kind of look at the end of World War II, the United States is the most powerful country on earth. We have a huge army, a huge navy, the economy is going very well, and yet we have this real feeling of uneasiness, a paradox, right? You think of the 1950s, women on roller skates bringing out your milkshakes and hamburgers, and, you know, the 50s, my parents grew up in the 50s, they had the breakfast of champions in the morning, black coffee and a cigarette, all right? That was breakfast for my parents out there. And at the same time, you got all of the Cold War. I'm going to ask here, to get a little bit of that discussion taking place, what happened? Why do we end up having the Cold War? How is the Cold War connected to what we're discussing this very minute about dropping the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Okay, well, Russia is a new enemy, right? And why is Russia a new enemy for us? Yeah.
After we shut the countries going along, they then had their arms race do something.
Okay.
So who would be the superpower?
All right. One of the other things here that I would tell you, is it not true that we get 2 superpowers at the end of the war? that seem to be polar opposites in many ways. And if we stop for a second, we could say, hey, Great Britain was in the war, and France was in the war, Japan was in the war, the United States was in the war, lots of people are in the war, but it's like the two people that rose up to the very top are incredibly different kind of people. We believe in the United States in free elections, and we believe in democracies, we believe that you can go out there and protest peacefully. Those are some of the things. Of course, America has hypocrisies, and we know it. What I really dig about the Soviet Union is that they don't pretend to any of that stuff. They don't come out there and tell you that, we have free speech. They say, we don't believe in that. You Americans want to give your, citizens that opportunity. We don't do this. And one of the things I want to draw you guys into today, and when I grew up as a kid, I knew nothing about communists except for the fact I didn't like them. I don't like commies. I was taught not to like communists, right? And I thought of them as some kind of evil ideology. Is it true that the United States would do anything that they can to spread our ideology today? Right? Let me ask you, a current event, things that are taking place in Egypt right now. What is the response in Egypt to the United States of America? Why are things so difficult for Obama and for the United States right now?
It hasn't proven itself in that country. And the fact that it hasn't shown that it hasn't worked is the fact that, the reason why the people are, against it.
Okay.
And they express their sentiments through, public demonstrations, stuff like that. But that's, democracy is not going to work in a country that's, Sharia laws.
Okay.
It's going to be a conflict because democracy is a government that's ruled by the people, for the people.
Mm-hmm.
Because people in Egypt, they're more, historically, they're more used to that theocratic.
Okay. 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 Now, you guys all know this. I don't think anybody's fooling the world with respect to Obama. Obama's watching what's going on, and this is one of the questions here with respect to foreign policy. Egypt has been a friend of ours for 30 years. That is, we get some benefit from it. Later down the line in this class, we'll talk a little bit about the Shah of Iran. The Shah was our friend. He gave us oil. He gave us military bases. He helped us out in any way he could. We didn't care about the way that he treated his own people. That wasn't important to us because we have that immediate gratification. And what we're finding out, and you just said the word hypocrisy, the Egyptians are going back to our American Revolution, aren't they? And they're trying to say, you guys had the American Revolution, autocratic government, George III, you overthrew George III, and we want a piece of that action. And now you're backing Mubarak. We can't have that happen. And I think you'll see that, we're hedging right now. If you've been paying attention, the United States is just going to wait and say, oh my, Mubarak's not going to be in power. Yes, we believe in democracies, all right? We hope that nobody saw that. We just shift out there really quick. But what I am getting at here is that other people have their ideologies too, which they need to spread. And I never questioned my own ideology because it was the American ideology. It's about capitalism. It's about open elections, about all this. Do the Soviet Union feel just as passionately about what they believe in their ideology? Okay? Now, and we start to come and have a little bit of that clash, which is connected. Now, I'm just going to talk for a couple minutes here, and I have the click. And I tell this little story out here. People know that I've been married for 22 years. All right? And I tell people out there, is a teaching thing out there. I used to wear this ring full of pride, go out there and let people know. And people say, are you married? And let me tell you about my marriage. You know what I mean? I got the ring out there. I'll tell you, I'm married. And I come home and, the wife is mad at me at something. I get all, oh my God, is it your birthday? Is it your anniversary? Is it this? Is it flowers? This is when I was newlywed. Oh my God, I do all this stuff. And now I come home 22 years later and she's mad with me. And I say, what's wrong? If you don't know, I'm not telling you. Now I don't care, The attitude now is, listen, it's not your birthday, it's not your anniversary. I don't want to play guessing games with you. I don't know what's wrong, and if you're not going to tell me, I'm not wasting my time anymore. Let me say I don't lament all this stuff. I jump on the couch and, do a little bit of this. Now, what I'm getting here, class, is the cold shoulder. And the cold shoulder, you react to the cold shoulder. You want to play cool with me and be cool, I'm going to be cold with you. To every action, there is another reaction taking place here. And of course, I have never, no fisticuffs, no violence. I don't believe in any of that stuff in my household. But the point is that we have a period of a Cold War taking place. What has happened is a breakdown of communication. I don't know what's wrong. I'm left to think about, this is what I believe in, this is what you believe in, and all I'm trying to do here is to get that balance when you look at some of these issues here, when you try to focus on the balance, is that students don't start a new chapter thinking that they're starting from scratch. It's not just the beginning of the Cold War, and I guess the other question that I wish to ask here is who was driving the Cold War? Right? Who was driving it? If the United States drops 2 atomic bombs and the Soviet Union doesn't have an atomic bomb, are we driving the atomic wars? All right, are we getting this thing going? And then we're very upset in 1949 when the Soviet Union comes back and they have their, weapon. It's like the great equalizer. And then the next weapon we have is 1,000 times stronger than the atomic bomb. And then the Soviet Unions will do that, right? To every action, there is an equal reaction. And I just want people to kind of focus on that ideology, to look at the ideology that's connected to who is driving the arms race, and that period that I mentioned of paradox, of contradiction, that we should be feeling so wonderful about ourselves because our military is the greatest in the world. Our Army, our Navy, our money, we are successful in World War II, but there's a spirit of anxiety that's below. Okay? All right, I'm going to shift here and see if I get a bit of luck and click on a little bit of the video so we can see what was happening here.
Marines and GIs struggled to recapture this enemy stronghold and its tactically vital airstrips and harbor. The offensive becomes a grueling fight for honor as these battle-hardened men attempt to liberate what was once American soil. The island would soon earn its place in history, written in the blood of the men that fought and died here.
There was a unwritten code, no prisoners, no quarter.
You had no sympathy whatsoever for the enemy. Actually, and I hate to say this, the more you killed, the better you felt. But that's what we were there for.
High above the chaos, fly aerial reconnaissance missions, their cameras capturing the battle below. After the war's end, many of these photographs were lost or forgotten, until now. These images now give a unique view of these 21 days of combat. The battle for Guam. December 10th, 1941. 3 days after Pearl Harbor, over 5,000 Japanese soldiers invade Guam. In less than 24 hours, the American garrison of some 400 men is forced to surrender. It is the first American territory to fall to the Japanese in World War II. 2.5 years later, these 225 square miles of rainforest and ravines, surrounded by coral reef, have become strategically vital in the war in the Pacific. If Guam's airstrips can be recaptured, American bombers will be only 1,400 miles from the Japanese home islands. B-29 heavy bombers are currently operating out of China with heavy losses. Flying from air bases in Guam would be a safer alternative, taking 1,200 miles off this deadly trip.
Guam was part of the Marianas Campaign, in which the United States decided to assault 3 islands in the Marianas, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. And the 3 together would put a dent, a serious dent, into the inner ring of the Japanese defense system.
The liberation of this island would also free some 20,000 Guamanians from Japanese rule. Many of these American nationals are indigenous Chamuro Indians. Under a brutal regime, they have suffered unimaginable atrocities, leaving hundreds dead. With Guam back in American hands, these loyal people would be safe, and morale back in the United States would be raised. In the months before the invasion, aerial reconnaissance experts examined thousands of photographs of Guam. For the first time, these original high-resolution images have been layered over a three-dimensional contour map, creating a unique perspective on the battle unfolding below. Stage by stage, the battle for Guam can be tracked from the air. Spearheading the American assault are over 50,000 American Marines and GIs preparing for the attack on troop ships stationed just off the island.
The officers particularly impressed us with the fact that we were going to be the first American troops to recapture a previous possession, and since it was a Marine barracks, it was especially important to us.
The old Marine barracks was there, what was left of it, they were going to, recapture that, and we felt good about that. Everybody was gung-ho to get in there and liberate Guam.
Before we hit Guam, they showed us movies of the rape of Nanking, what the Japs did to the Chinese. And that's like getting us up. We were emotionally ready to go kick some butts.
The Japanese planned to turn the island into a lethal hellhole for the invading forces after spirited words from their war leader, Hideki Tojo.
The fate of the Japanese Empire depends on the result of your operation. Inspire the spirit of officers and men to the very end. Continue to destroy the enemy gallantly and persistently.
We respected them because they would fight to their death. And that was a trait that was admired, but also sometimes it was stupid, particularly would kill themselves. But that was kind of good, one less we had to kill.
Well, we were told the Japanese are small, they have thick lenses, they can't see, you can whip them one hand tied behind you. That was not the truth. These troops were absolutely fantastic fighters.
Lieutenant General Takeshi Takashina commands nearly 19,000 troops on Guam. His aim, to annihilate the invading Americans before they can advance off the beaches. His men prepare pillboxes and trenches and place artillery close to the island's main airfield and harbor. Aerial photographs reveal some of these deadly defenses. U.S. intelligence also studies the island's coast. Dangerous reefs surround Guam. The Americans decide that the beaches along the western coast are the most suitable for their amphibious landing. July 21st, 1944, W-Day, the code name for the day of the invasion, begins. At 5:30 a.m., American battleships, cruisers, and rocket ships begin their final barrage of the month-long bombardment of the Japanese positions.
The big ships were pummeling it with 14 and 12-inch guns. And up there were little carrier planes. And they were peeling off, coming down and dropping bombs and firing their rockets.
I don't know how that island why it didn't sink. They threw enough armor in there, that thing should have gone down to the bottom.
Aerial photos show the island after the attack. The results are devastating. The American invasion is a huge tactical gamble. Army and Marine units will land two amphibious forces almost 7 miles apart on either side of the Orote Peninsula. From these two separate beachheads, they aimed to drive through enemy defenses to link up and cut off thousands of Japanese from the mainland. It is a risky and unprecedented tactic. But if they successfully capture the Orote Peninsula, the island's main airfield and harbor will be in American hands. W-Day, 7:30 a.m. The order is given to land the landing force. Troops board their amphibious tractors and landing craft and prepare themselves for combat.
It got very somber because now we know we're going into combat.
You're deadly concerned, and you are kind of afraid because, after all, it's only 18, 19 years old.
At 18, I wasn't that emotionally as scared as the older fella. I guess scared came later.
Reconnaissance aircraft capture the invasion fleet as over 50,000 Marines and soldiers of the United States Army head for the beaches of Guam. They prime themselves for a military gamble that could cost the lives of thousands. On the northern beaches, amphibious tractors known as Amtraks lead the attack as they come ashore between Adalup and Asan points. They would go down in history as the Devil's Horns.
But then I heard all this clatter, bang-a-rang, and everything going on. It was something like standing in the middle of a whole company of jackhammers. The noise was just awful.
And then I remember getting on shore and things were just blowing to bits, trees and logs and stuff. And we were at the foot of a huge hill that was in front of us, that was the ridge line along the coastline there.
The Marines advanced toward the high ground, where deadly Japanese fortifications overlook the northern beaches. Meanwhile, 7 miles south, the Japanese have the other landing force dead center in a lethal crossfire from artillery.
There were cases where the Amtrak literally disappeared and arms and legs and torsos flying all over the place. It was a frightening spectacle for these young Marines to see.
They had had 2 years to place their artillery and mortars. They got 11 of those Amtraks.
Got ashore. It was horrible, absolutely horrible.
The southern landing force is ripped to pieces before it even hits land. In the north, the Marines face a near vertical climb. The American tactical gamble to liberate the island is in danger of faltering at the shoreline. The beaches have become a killing zone. If the Americans don't storm the Japanese coastal defenses, they'll never make it home alive. July 21st, 1944, the Pacific island of Guam. American troops are caught in a vicious Japanese crossfire as they head for shore. 50,000 men land on 2 separate beachheads to the north and south of the vital Orote Peninsula. Off the southern beaches, enemy artillery fire annihilates U.S. Marines as they advance in their amphibious tractors.
I've had them blown up on either side of us and behind us. And you're thinking, wow, am I going to be next? And it creates quite a problem psychologically.
It was 2 artillery pieces, and they were having a field day. They were landing on the right and the left. They figured the next one almost ought to be right in our lap. A little extra praying. And you kind of, you felt you were a Marine. You're supposed to be able to put up with that stuff. That's your job.
Dozens of Amtraks are blown to pieces, but the Americans managed to crawl onto the beaches to be met with what remains of their units.
You could see Amtraks that were knocked out, occasional body floating in the water or on the beach.
Yeah, there was carnage all over the place. We saw Marines' bodies. I hate to look at a dead Marine, so I always turned away. I just couldn't see it. I guess that was my weakness.
The Japanese defend from a series of concrete blockhouses and trench systems. The Americans are pinned down by a hail of lead.
Japanese with their machine guns were really butchering us. The way they had their machine guns and mortars arranged, they had us covered, you might say, for a couple hundred yards after you went inland from the beach itself.
A wall of fire rips the Americans apart. To stay on the beach means certain death.
Wasn't a very wide beach. We got pinned down there. Pretty tough to dig a foxhole in coral. And a lot of that beach was coral. It was not a pleasant day.
Despite the enemy bombardment, the Americans advanced through sheer blood and guts.
And we started to climb up out of the hole, and before we even got to the top, like an explosion hit right on the edge, the top edge, and buried us with sand. Our ears were ringing, we had sand in our eyes and so forth, but had we been 2 or 3 seconds earlier, it would have completely wiped us out.
By 10:34 a.m., U.S. troops are 1,000 yards inland despite heavy losses.
It came down to a case where one man had to keep rushing straight ahead directly over the same path that maybe the man in front of him had just been gunned down in. Now, that's a frightening thing to think about, to run in the same spot where another man fell. But that's what it took, and by the end of the day, they had made significant gains in the southern beachhead and pushed the Japanese back.
The Marines in the south dig in to protect their precarious beachhead. 7 miles north, their comrades have to climb a series of impenetrable ridges overlooking the invasion beaches. Japanese commander Takeshi Takeshina has these steep inclines laced with deadly machine gun posts and bunkers.
What they'd have to do is reach from rock to rock and sort of scale this 400-foot precipice.
The soil on top was loose, and it was very difficult to climb, and occasionally you could find a bush to get a hold of to help you.
Now, when you're using both hands to scale something, to grab onto a branch, you can't grab onto your rifle. You can't fire back. All you can do is take what is offered to you and hope that you reach the top.
One of the things the Japanese were doing on the ridge was they were high up, so they would roll grenades down that hill. And you'd see them coming, but you couldn't do very much about them, except try to get out of the way of them.
U.S. Marines are cut to pieces by the hidden machine guns.
This dumb, young infantryman picked up a puny little carbine, and he started to fire at the machine gun. I said, "Mom, I won't be coming home."
The Marines launch a series of frontal attacks at the crest of the ridge, but nothing's working. At the end of day 1, the shattered men have advanced just 200 yards. The deadly ridges remain under Japanese control. At dusk, they consolidate their positions in the north. In the south, the Americans prepare to repel a major Japanese counterattack.
The Japanese figured Marine front lines had to be rather sparsely held, which they were. And so the Japanese figured if we can push through now, maybe push them off, we can disrupt the American landings and then take care of the northern beachhead as well.
W Day, 11:30 p.m. The young Marines and GIs that have struggled ashore on the first day of this battle steel themselves for the fight of their lives.
The Japanese troops decided to prepare for a banzai attack. You could hear them doing a lot of yelling. We're yelling back and forth.
It's different being at nighttime, being in a war zone. Really different. You can't see, you can hear, and you can smell. And they were as acute to the way we smelled as we were to the way they smelled. We knew when they were near, you could smell them.
750 troops of the Japanese Empire advance with one sole objective: to kill every last American on this island. The Battle of Guam, Day 1. U.S. troops face a fierce counterattack from 750 Japanese. Their aim, to destroy the Americans' fragile foothold on this Pacific island.
There was a lot of shooting, flares, grenades, people yelling.
And there were so many of them, and they were so close that even with our machine guns and so forth, we couldn't get them all.
The Japanese troops blast through the Marine front lines.
As I was laying back down, one of the Japanese soldiers stood over me, and I just froze. And he looked at me for 8, maybe 10 seconds. And I don't know whether he thought I was dead. For some reason,
You guys are carnage out there. I wonder if he's dead or not. You know, oh my God. All right. All right. I just wanted to say very quickly, I wanted to give you guys an introduction. I've watched the rest of the videos there. You can take that down there on YouTube and, you know, go through that. But I want to call, if I can get to come out here, one of my students in History 275, Ana Pablo, who gave me the idea about this. And one of the things that I really like doing is I tap into my students and I ask them for all kinds of ideas for shows. If you spend a little time talking to students, everybody has a story and everybody has a show and something that they want to talk about. So Bernice is doing some work in the back there, but I'll just turn it over to you. Just maybe talk a little bit about your passion and, you know, all that stuff. Are you on there?
Got on.
Yeah, it sounds like you're in surround sound now.
My name is Ana Pablo, for you who don't know me. I am one of Dr. Haas's students. I've been one of his students for a few semesters because he's a great teacher. I approached Dr. Haas about this because my father is from Guam, and I just recently lost my grandfather. And it happened to be this summer that I was going to take the time to sit down and record his stories about his survival through World War II. My grandfather was 14 at the time, and we grew up hearing, when we were younger, we didn't hear all the gory stories. We got to hear like we ran in the jungle and we hid. As we got older, he started becoming more detailed with us about how they mistreated him. They captured a lot of his family, put him in concentration camps. My grandmother, who didn't know my grandfather at the time, she was a little younger than my grandfather. Her family was removed from their homes. The Japanese took it from their ranch. They were moved to a concentration camp in a jungle called Menengo, which was a 4-day trek for them. They weren't allowed to bring anything except for what they could carry, whether in sacks or on their water buffalo that my great-grandfather had. A lot of these stories we're starting to lose because the Guamanian population is very small. And as our elders are starting to pass away, we're starting to lose a lot of our roots, a lot of our heritage, a lot of our history. So it's really important to me to make sure that I keep it alive, not only for myself, but for my son, for my nephews, for other Chamuros who don't really have a voice. A lot of times growing up, people would ask me what my nationality was. Obviously, I'm multiracial, but when I would say Guam, everybody would ask me if I was Romanian. I said, no, Guamanian, as in Chamuro. My native family is Chamuro. And it was really important for me to bring light to my father's side of the family because we don't really hear about the smaller islands, the smaller countries, the struggles that they go through. war is big and brutal, and a lot of time we get a perspective of what we're taught in school. A lot of the perspective that we're taught is the American perspective. The clips that Dr. Haas showed you was very patriotic and very, it was gory, and I respect the Marines and their sacrifice, but everything that we tend to learn is from one view. And I really wanted to bring in another view and give a broader look on what happens. I wanted to open up the door a little bit more on other cultures and how they suffered through. And are we okay with it?
Yeah, I think we're still working. Bernice is trying to do all the technology, so whatever you wish to.
Okay, sorry.
You're doing a good job.
Hopefully what I'm trying to do is present to you guys a small portion of a documentary that I'm trying to put together. It's far from perfect, but it's something that I'm really proud of. I'm in the process currently of going and traveling to visit other Chamorro communities, to the Guam sons and daughters of like the Guamanian community, and record all these histories before they fade away. It's become a really big project for me. Like I said, it started off with the passing of my grandfather and I'm losing it, but the more I try to reach out to the community, the more apparent it becomes that we're losing it. Even the language. When my grandparents moved here, after Guam was liberated, my grandfather joined the United States Air Force. He was very patriotic. He wanted to serve for this country because they came and liberated his family. They gave him their land back. They gave him their freedom back. And by freedom, I mean freedom. And an opportunity to start again. And so when they came over here, they were very worried about being castricized or looked down upon. So they didn't teach my father or his brothers or sisters the Chamorro language. So we've kind of lost our language. They didn't want to pass it down because the neighborhood that they moved to looked down upon foreigners. And they didn't want my parents or my father and his siblings to grow up kind of in the shadows of everybody else, because it was bad enough that they looked different, so they didn't want them to sound different as well. My grandparents were very hardworking. My grandfather was in the Air Force and then also kept side jobs all the time. He was a father of 8 children because they didn't have cable back then. My grandmother, I don't know how she did it because the income was close to nil, and their story is like incredible. The way they forged together, my grandmother held down the fort, 8 kids, ranging from, she had them back to back to back. I don't know how she did that either. I have 1 kid and he's more than enough, and it's been 7 years and I don't need another anytime soon. So I have an immense amount of respect for my grandmother. They traveled a lot. My favorite stories that they would used to tell me was when they were in Alaska. And I was like, how do islanders end up in Alaska? We're from the tropics, we're from the sun. Like, how did you end up in snow and ice? But it was some of the best stories that my grandma could tell us, because it was right after my grandparents had celebrated their couple of years of marriage, and then they found other Chamorros in another place. So they had a lot to relate to, and they could talk to each other. And it was nice for her because she could finally speak in her native tongue again. Because when she came to America, she didn't want to speak it anymore. I don't know, just preserving their stories and stories like it means a lot to me. It means a lot to me to be able to pass it on, not only to, like I said, my family, but others who don't know. For people who don't know where Guam is, it's a little humiliating because you want people to respect you and your culture. You want people to know, like, this is where you come from. I'm from a different place from you, but we're here. We exist, and we're just as important as the big countries. A lot of this means a lot to my family as well, because like I said, with the passing of my grandfather, we lost a lot. My grandmother, unfortunately, who was supposed to be here, she went into surgery for her thyroid, but she's okay. But she really wanted to get this done also, because it was something that we wanted to preserve. There's a lot of organizations that the Chamorro community run and participate in, especially in San Diego. I never knew that there was a lot of Chamorros in a community until you say that there's going to be a liberation barbecue, and then millions of people show up and you didn't even know they existed. Like, for the longest time, I thought I was the only Chamorro within 30 miles, and then we say get a barbecue, roast a pig, and like thousands of flock. It's amazing, and I love it. I also wanted to pay homage to my father's side because I'm multi-ethnic. I tend to focus on those other ethnicities because there's a lack of the Chamorro community, and I really wanted to step out of myself and become more in touch with that. I wanted to make sure that I understood like the struggle that my grandparents came through, the struggle that it took for us to be here, for me to be in school, for my son to be in school. It means a lot to me, it really does. To know that they could be a one income family with 8 kids during a time where, you know, materialistic things didn't matter. My 8 aunts and uncles had to share clothes. They had to take turns 2 at a time in the baths and showers. Like, it just made me really grateful for the things I have. My favorite saying to my son is, be lucky you don't have 7 brothers and sisters, because you would get nothing new, because his favorite thing is new toys wherever we go. So it's like, hey, be lucky. It could be worse. I mean, really, it's just a legacy for my family to continue. I don't know if anybody has any questions.
I'm going to tell you what, Bernice is going to have you upload, see if we can get the computer so you can do your show. So you go over there, and I'm supposed to take over and do something. I'm going to probably do dancing or couple, whatever. Yeah, I think Bernice is going to need you to load up that. I was just kind of laughing and listening to this about food, and people have heard me when I first started teaching here. We used to get all kinds of Mexican food across the street, and all these staff meetings and division meetings. Oh my God, boring things. Did I say that on TV? Anyway, all those kind of meetings, but they bring all kinds of burritos over and tacos and all that good stuff out. It always brings people together. I mean, once you start bringing the food, you don't mind listening to people as long as you're, you know, feeding and stuff. I had a cousin that lives in New York, and he would visit, and we have a little family, a very kind of humble family of 5, and everybody polite. My mother would bring down the fried chicken and place it there, and he would grab it. And we thought that was so strange. It's like, you don't grab all that stuff. And if you don't grab, you don't get. I have a very, very different kind of, you know, life there. So you see all the food and people coming together here. When I ask you guys, I'm really dying to show you the third little clip out there. So everybody, oh my God, yeah, getting into the violence and all that. What's going to happen? I can tell you, somebody had mentioned earlier about the sake and about drinking. The third, I believe it's the 3rd episode out there where the Japanese are really drinking heavily. And I think it's one of the sad things that the Japanese start to cry and basically believe that they're not coming home anymore to see, having you know, pictures and looking at their kids and all that stuff and realizing that they aren't going home. What did you guys think about the films? All right, anybody is part of the story about the tenacity of the Japanese or what the Americans were doing? Any feedback on the film today? Yeah.
I'm curious how much of this film was taken at the time and how much is recreation?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the answer. It seems to me that a lot of that is recreated again, and you know, they try to. It seems to me that the historian knows his material and that they've investigated and got the right questions out there so they can get a pretty good story. But obviously, you see the simulations and all that. If my memory serves me, very interesting having an island 8 by 30. You think about 8 miles. I was teaching colonial America the other day. In Delaware, the whole state of Delaware is 100 miles long, and it's 9 miles at the top there. So you can go out for a little jog, and the wife says, where are you going? And you say, Maryland, all right? You just got to go 9 miles, and you're out there. But to see that kind of volcanic, you know, material and how difficult it is to land. And I think some of the reading is very interesting, too, that the United States, again, after the Spanish-American War in 1898, there's a process of Americanization. And a lot of these people on Guam wanted to be treated like U.S. citizens, and they wanted to be part of the, you know, the American way. And I'm improvising, as you might be able to tell here. One of the things that I'm very big on, we're talking about Egypt, that was one of the questions we talked about earlier, was the fact that I've talked to so many people around the world and listened to so many people around the world that love the message of our founding fathers. I mean, the idea of constitutionalism and freedom of the press and all the amendments, our Bill of Rights and all that. What people don't like about the United States is our foreign policy. That is, there's a disparity about what we say we believe in and what we're going to do, and about some of the other things, you know, that we're actually doing. And it's kind of interesting, and I threw this out, if you think about, you know, Vietnam, and we think about Ho Chi Minh, who was fighting the Japanese in World War II, and FDR liked Ho Chi Minh because obviously he was a major asset. And then at the end of the, you know, the war, basically in 1954, when the French surrender at Dien Bien Phu, the American attitude is let's go to Geneva, Switzerland, and let's have free elections, because that's what Americans stand for. We believe in freedom. Let's have free elections until the penny drops for the Americans, and they understand if there are free elections taking place in Vietnam, who's going to be the winner? And of course, the answer there would be Ho Chi Minh, which the United States cannot tolerate. And I think people, rightly so, in my humble opinion, have picked up on that disparity between the principles that we espouse and the reality that's out there. And I think that's what you're seeing from Egypt right now. If you Americans believe in democracy and freedom, let's have it. All right, why are you backing a person that they call a dictator? Why? And of course the answer is because, you know, we get some of the material, we get some of the things that we want. It's like choosing, trading off poisons, and we get that, you know, instantaneous type of gratification taking place. But what's interesting here too is that sometimes the way to get people to be very American is you have the Japanese occupation taking place. The Japanese were very, very hard on the people in Guam. They were setting up airfields, and they were setting up there and working with respect to farming and to come up with a Japanese way. You hear all kinds of stories that the Japanese would say about the Chamuro, that they were lazy people, examples of the women just interested putting on red lipstick, that they don't have that work ethic, that they don't really work hard, and it was a process to be part of, you know, making them like the Japanese. And I think one of those other things that we covered in the class earlier was the fact that this worked in the very beginning to the Japanese talking about Asia for Asians, all right? The way that works is that when you're anti-imperialist, that seems like a beautiful thing. It doesn't matter if you're Filipino or you're Chinese or the Japanese talking about everybody coming together, Asia for Asia, until people realized it was Japan for Japan. And we have some of these people that are very upset. And when you start looking, watched a little video yesterday, why does Guam not get the respect? We don't have the citizenship, we don't have equality, and I think obviously in some ways this backfires on the United States of America because our lofty principles. We have incredibly beautiful, lofty principles, but I think for a lot of people the reality is a little bit different, and that's why people end up being angry and frustrated. But we understand what happens to the people in Guam, forced to do all kinds of things. We do have some raping and pillaging taking place. At one point, the Japanese gave up on the idea of trying to make these people like the Japanese and just use them in very pragmatic fashion. And when I mean pragmatic, just largely for the war effort, all right? For the war efforts. They forget we're not going to try to convert you to our ideology necessarily. We need you to work the land. You know, the agriculture has to be there. And I think one of the big principles, too, right now is the fact that the United States of America, as you well know, we're very big on military bases, and we want to take people from Okinawa and put them in Guam, and it's one of those catch-22s for the people in Guam because a lot of what they get is from the military, and yet all the abuses that take place on Guam are also there. I'm talking about diabetes is incredibly high on Guam. The risk of getting cancer is very high because it's a military base that's being set up there, and it's one of those catch-22s. I flip this out to people. I'm thinking off the top of my head because I'm on TV, I think. But anyway, one of those things that I've spoken to students being a bartender for 20 years. Right? Everybody who came in and smoked drank, and everybody who drank tipped and all that. And all of a sudden they got rid of smoking, and I didn't have any smoke on my shirts anymore, and I was really, you know, very cleanly, and I came home and I smelled good and all that stuff, except I was broke. All right? I didn't have a penny anymore because if you can't smoke, people don't want to drink. If you don't drink, they don't smoke. So what do you want to be? Do you want to have your health but be broke, or vice versa? And I think my attitude was I wanted money, even if my shirt smelled like, you know, cigarettes. So it's a catch-22 for the people in Guam. If the military pulls out, what are you going to do with the economy? We have a lot of people that don't get proper education. And I think the other attitude, too, is for people is that you pay your dues, that you ought to get, you know, something in return. There should be more finances and people looking after the people in Guam, you know, for all of those things that are taking place there. So anyway, how's our personal journey? Are we getting there? Okay. I don't know. I was talking about the 1920s. I'm going to have to dance or something here or tell some jokes in the class there. So anything. All right. Any other observations, any other things in the class that you've picked up from the film about the Japanese tenacity what was taking place? Does anybody just feel for the horrors of the war? That one Marine saying, I couldn't look at a dead Marine, I guess that was my weakness. I was like, you know, I don't know, I'm not that tough, you know what I mean? You know, I'd flat out go out there and say that some of that horrific, you know, stuff that was taking place is just absolutely incredible on both sides, and I think that needs to be brought out. And then explaining the Japanese that were drinking the liquor and the sake and everything else with tears coming out of their eyes, looking at their family, wondering whether they'd ever see their family members. They think war is a bitch, and you know, you get to see that clearly, and you know what's taking place here. Okay, we're just waiting for a little bit of the sound. Yeah.
War is horrendous, then shouldn't be going to war be something that is, as far as like public opinion, it should be something that like the majority of the population is against.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, still, you know, like if you were to take if you were to measure the people who were in favor or in disagreement with going to war before Pearl Harbor,
mm-hmm.
and you took that same amount of people and brought it up to this time, again, people who were against the invasion of Iraq and the war that just, you know,
well,
in 2011, you can see that there's a striking similarity that the majority of the American people were against the war.
Mm-hmm.
So how is it that you still go to war, but the majority of the people were against it?
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
What was the government of these countries?
Yeah.
What were they doing in order to sway people's opinion? Were they showing them pictures of Japanese people doing all types of quote-unquote horrendous things
sure.
to innocent people so that the people in America would have this sentiment toward the Japanese that, oh, you know, those people are barbaric. They're not human, you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
So,
yeah. There's a good Black Sabbath song, I think, that answers that. We'll talk. I mean, seriously, it does that. Are we set? Okay, one of the things I would just let you know, if there's any place that you can put that permanently, because if you hold it, and you, well, it's very hard if you shake it around, then it makes noise, but if you can get it, you know, steady, and I'm happy to turn over the show to you now. Well, whatever works for you. I'm just, if you move it around a lot, it makes a lot of static.
Hello? How about that? Okay. Okay. This is the documentary that I've been doing right now. It's still in its baby steps, so I hope you enjoy, though. Like I said, this means a lot to me, and welcome to my family.
Welcome to a personal journey to where America's Day begins, presented by Anima and Pablo.
Guam. It's a small island located in the Pacific Ocean, next to the Philippines and part of the Mariana Islands. Guam is a U.S. territory, roughly 209 square miles, with the capital of Agana and home to the Chamuro people. My family's journey begins in Agat with my grandmother and in Barigata with my grandfather. They didn't know each other at the time, but still shared some amazing stories. My original plan was to record my grandparents so I could pass on our family's history before it was lost. As my grandparents got older and memories began to fade, it became a race against time. On January 14th, 2009, I lost part of that race. But I retained all of the memories of my grandfather and the stories of survival that he told me. My favorite stories were the ones of him surviving through World War II. It sounded something like a movie and a little bit unreal.
Guam in the Marianas. Guam in the late 1930s. Guam in the twilight of peace. A languorous island where native Chamuros pursue their placid, age-old ways. This is United States territory in the far Pacific, heritage of the 1898 war with Spain. Half-forgotten stepchild among America's overseas possessions. Under the guardianship of the United States Navy, life has remained serene, unruffled. But the pattern of history is changing, and naval authorities on Guam plead in vain with Congress to fortify the strategic island while time remains. Peace is but a mask behind which lurks the ugly face of war. Already Japanese bayonets cast lengthening shadows on Guam and on its people. The American garrison on Guam, only a few hundred Marines. A fact duly noted 1,600 miles to the north in Tokyo, where the warlords of Japan convene to plot the means by which they will hammer out the greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, to the greater glory of the Emperor. The geographic names which the militarists weigh in their deliberations are heavy with coming history. Pearl Harbor and the Philippines, Borneo and Hong Kong, Malaya and Singapore. But there is another, lesser-known name to be integrated into the plan, and that name is Guam. Guam, the American pillbox without guns in the Marianas. Saipan, Tinian, Rota are Japanese. Southernmost is Guam, and Guam is doomed. On the entire island, there is no defensive weapon larger than a .30 caliber machine gun. The hopelessly outnumbered Marines face 5,000 fully equipped Japanese landing troops. December 10th, 1941. Guam is overwhelmed. Guam is now Japanese, but the sun has set for the Chamuros, and during the long night ahead, Guam is forced to muster with Saipan and Tinian, and the three islands form a cluster of death traps across the path leading north to Japan, west to the Philippines. With every passing month of occupation, the Japanese impose increasingly harsh restrictions on Guam and its people, using every device of pressure and propaganda to integrate forever the island into their empire. For 2.5 years, Guam waits, secured and beyond reach within the Japanese wall of water and steel. But in June 1944, incredibly, miraculously, powerful United States naval forces appear off the Marianas as the Allies, on the other side of the world, storm ashore at Normandy.
Wait, before we jump into the American patriotic heroism, let's take it back. I would now like to share the stories that have been passed on to me by not only my grandparents, but other Chamuro survivors. One of the earliest stories I can remember my grandfather telling me was about the day the Japanese invaded Guam. Him, his brothers, his uncles, his cousins ran into the jungle seeking coverage and knowing that nothing good was about to happen. They caught my grandfather, placed him in a camp, and then forced him to work in the rice fields. No one dared to rebel or to fight back. Chamuros were unarmed and simple living people.
With no protection and no weapons, they had no defense against the Japanese. On the same day, but further south on the island, my grandma recalled the day that the Japanese invaded as well. She heard the firing and the guns and ran home to find nobody there. She figured they must have gone in the hill to where the ranch was at and proceeded. When she got there, her and her family tried to hide, but yet the Japanese came and found them. They took them into their home, offered them food, shelter, and warmth. In return, the Japanese weren't as brutal. Though they didn't physically harm my grandmother, they did a pillaging on her culture. They no longer allowed her or any of the children around them to speak Chamuro. They taught them their customs, their language, the way they write. Anything that wasn't Japanese was not to be done or tolerated. When word came that the United States was coming back to reclaim Guam, the Japanese soldiers rounded everybody in my grandmother's village. They told them to pack only what they could carry or cart on their water buffaloes and march them up to Menango, a jungle nearby. Here in Menango, they had made makeshift concentration camps, and the Chamuros were forced to leave behind everything they owned and any shred of hope that they had. To make matters worse, my great-grandmother was pregnant at this time and very far along, so she would tire easily, and when this happened, my great-grandfather would put together a makeshift cart and pull her behind the water buffaloes that he owned. All of them were scared because they had no idea what was to come. They thought that they were going to never come home or see each other ever again. The day the Americans made it to Menango is a story that I'll never forget. My grandmother told me that there was 2 Japanese soldiers standing next to a hut and asked all the children in the camp if they wanted some candy. The children got excited and began to run over. But right before the children got there, American soldiers stormed up the side of the mountain and the Japanese soldiers ran off. The children still proceeded to the hut, only to find nothing but a pile of grenades. My grandmother said that they were going to round all the children in there and then just blow it up. Then they rounded up all the women and men that were in their 20s, forced them into caves, and once they were all in, opened fire. With nowhere to run or hide, many were wounded and even more died. My grandmother's brother-in-law and my grandmother's cousin were the fortunate ones to be wounded. The only reason they survived was because they covered themselves with dead bodies, because once the Japanese ran out of bullets, they came in and stabbed the rest to death.
Now it is the Americans who bear down on Guam in overwhelming strength. Now it is the Japanese who are doomed. Under Admiral Spruance, ships of the United States Fifth Fleet have brought 100,000 troops and 250,000 sailors to the Marianas. Saipan is the first target. Saipan, headquarters of Japan's Central Pacific Fleet, commanded by Admiral Nagumo, the same Nagumo who smashed Pearl Harbor. Saipan, whose loss rings from the Emperor's supreme naval advisor the anguished cry, "Hell is upon us." Saipan and on Tinian, on Guam, the assault troops inch forward against suicidal Japanese resistance. And while soldiers and Marines struggle for each yard of earth, far to the west, many leagues seaward, another battle is shaping. A Japanese carrier force from bases in the Philippines sets out to crush the American landings. But the approach of the Japanese fleet has been spotted by American submarines, its position betrayed, its course plotted. The Japanese pilots, most of them young and inexperienced, are marked for death before they start. The Americans are waiting. The Americans are armed. The Americans are prepared. American carrier planes are brilliantly deployed to meet the oncoming Japanese. The ensuing battle is a slaughter, a rout, a turkey shoot. Single day's bag of the air war anywhere, on any front. 400 Japanese planes butchered for a loss of 26 Americans. 3 carriers, 2 tankers are also sunk. The back of Japanese naval aviation is permanently broken in the Battle of the Philippine Sea. With the Imperial Japanese Navy beaten off, the troops, under Marine General Holland Smith, commander of the 5th Amphibious Force, set their sights for the grueling conquest of the Marianas. Against the Americans, the Japanese have pitted units of their crack Manchurian army. The Japanese resist. The Japanese die. The Japanese do not surrender. Japanese fall in the battle for Guam. Last-ditch defenders are blasted from caves or commit suicide by leaping to death. Agana, Guam's battered capital, liberated by the blood and sacrifice of young Americans. the battle is over. The mopping up goes on for months before the last Japanese soldier is ferreted from his hiding place.
Alrighty. Okay. Just for times-wise, I'm going to cut it a little short. Can you hear me? Okay. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Like I said, it's still in its baby stages. I'm hoping to finish it out within the next year and a half. Really tightened up and hopefully broadcasting more and somewhere else. I don't know if anybody have any questions, comments, concerns.
Before we have that, we just have a round of applause for our guest speaker. Yeah, please. A real quick question here. I'm just watching the time out there. Yeah.
It is a U.S. territory. It was previously a U.S. territory when Japan took it, and then the U.S. Claimed it back. The Guamanians do have citizenship, yes. And then I know you had a question.
The song Local Sound, was that was made up by Guam, and they faced punishment by Japanese, but was it some, I don't know if you could tell me, was it some while they worked, or was it in direct defiance in the Japanese and silent, or was it out loud?
One more time. Are you asking whether when they sang the song, how they were caught, or?
Was it in direct defiance, or was it sung in silence?
Both. If you were caught doing anything that was considered unpatriotic towards the Japanese, it was crazy punishment. It was really brutal, and they tend to not cross those lines.
Okay. Any other quick comments? I have less than 5 minutes, and I have to close her up there. But any comments?
Yeah.
Or yeah.
Were the children taught not to say anything that would go against the Japanese?
Absolutely. My grandmother was in grade school at that time, so when they relocated her to her ranch, that's when they started to implement the Japanese teachings. Matter of fact, she told me a story that once the bell rang, I believe she said she was 7. The bell rang to signal the end of the school. She hopped up to run out the door, and the sensei caught her and beat her for hopping up like that, because it was disrespectful. It was considered rude, and she did receive a beating. She went home, told her parents, and my great-grandparents told her, you know better. Pretty much like, do what you have to do so we can survive and get through this.
Okay. All right. We have another round of applause for our guest.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. I got about 3 minutes, if you guys would just be so kind and let you know that I appreciate you being here, and a lot of people that make this happen. We did a little improvising today, but I'm very happy. I have covered many, many shows around the world. This is the first time I've ever done anything on Guam, and so this is nice to be able to get to the island and look at it and to talk about it and talk to somebody who can share firsthand knowledge, so that's very important. So I'm very pleased about this, and I'm pleased that everybody's here. One of the people that I always focus on in the back that does not get a lot of attention is Bernice Watson. You see Bernice coming up here with the microphones, and she just got this little laptop with all the information while she's in the middle of a show, and she's running up here, to put this in and making all the that people work many hours before the show actually takes place that you may not pick up on this. So if we can have a round of applause for Bernice. And also for 3C Media that broadcasts this out to 110 community colleges and global partners. We have a show coming up on March 9th, and I will have many, many shows this semester, and I will give out the information so people are aware of that, and welcome to come. And I hope that people, as they come to these shows, let other people know about it. I'm always saying, please bring friends and anybody else here so that they can partake in these, and make sure that you sign in so that we can give you all the points that you should be getting. for my History 275 class, just so everybody's clear, because I always told you I look after you. If we have something going on, video conference, show, film, whatever, that you know where we are. I passed out a little study guide today with 3 possible essay questions. I will choose 2 of those. I also gave a little PowerPoint on World War II. That's my own personal PowerPoint, which would be helpful. Next week on Monday and Wednesday, I will get heavily into the Cold War. The following Monday after that, we'll get to the point where we'll have our first examination. So again, thank you for everybody who participated.